Hi, I'm Doug McKenzie and welcome to the Fintech Show. Now today we're going to be understanding digital identity and the obsession with match rates. Now at Fintech Finance, we speak with organizations that have to deal with identity 24/7, 365 days a year. Now financial organizations are under some of the strictest KYC regulations of any industry in the world. And so to the FI that finds the golden goose of digital onboarding comes the spoils. Now, today, I'm going to be finding out from experts in the identity field from around the world, because as finance becomes digital, we need to understand how we can improve financial inclusion and onboard people and get better at understanding who people are without actually meeting them. Now, I caught up with Garient over at Trulioo. Trulioo are an industry-leading organization that help financial institutions of all shapes and sizes onboard their customers from around the world, spearheading that ability for banks to onboard their customers easier and improve financial inclusion. So I'm so excited to have him on the show today. We've also got Boothby from Santander, and Rod is an absolute veteran of the identity field. So having his past experiences, I'm so excited to kind of glean some insight and see some of the comparative natures of how the industry has shifted over the years and where it might go in the future. So I'm very excited to hear Pepe's insights later on in the show. Could I actually ask you to explain to our audience what a match rate is?
Absolutely. And let's start with this concept. And we can all agree that you, Doug, are more than just your personal information, right? You have a name, you have an address, you have a date of birth, you might have a nationally delivered identifier, right? In the US, it's the Social Security number. And all of those are meant to be secret. Not everybody should know all of that data. And they're meant to serve as a kind of a passport, right? If you assert that data, it can be verified and it allows you access to a new product or service or to an existing account that you have. That's the predominant way that we interact with our identity. Now, we can also say that your biometrics or your behavior are also parts of your identity. They can be tokenized and they can allow you access to products and services. A decade ago, who would have thought that we would open our phones with a fingerprint or a face scan? And today, it's commonplace. We don't even think about it. And so we are aware that your digital experience will increasingly be enhanced with things like biometrics and behavior and digital tokens and digital signals. But for much of the world today, your personal information is the way that you get access to products and services.
Have match rates actually become the most crucial metric for compliance teams?
I mean, it's critically important. Again, for us, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have always been a digital-only bank, and there's an expectation that comes along with that from our customers. They expect things to happen instantaneously. They expect us to be able to address their questions right away. They expect us to approve their transactions right away. And so for us, it is a point of differentiation. I do think that those companies that can properly manage fraud are much better set up for success in the long term than those that cannot. I mean, this can really make or break a company. And so doing this effectively, again, helps the company to do what it needs to do, but by doing so, they're ensuring that customers get the experience that they're asking for and expect based on those expectations that were set up right up front as part of the onboarding process.
My favorite data scientist told me there is no such thing as bad data. All data is useful data. Sometimes data is incomplete. Sometimes data can be misleading. It contains one-time innocent, innocuous errors. And you have to be able to recognize that maybe I added an A to the name Michael and it looks like Michaela Jordan, but everything else that we have indicates that it's actually Michael and it's just a one-time error. So all data is good data and can be used in a data science environment with algorithms to help us get more and more accurate. So financial institutions I've heard a quote recently, are not built anymore, they're assembled. And they're assembled with a number of third-party services to enable them to give delightful, safe, and secure experiences to consumer at scale around the world. We truly live in the future. And if there's a financial institution out there that's trying to figure out for themselves how to onboard consumers around the world quickly, they're perhaps reinventing something that's already been fixed and developed by Trulioo, which is this ability to accurately match individuals around the world, given all of those nuances. So again, back to your point about the reams of data that you have to go through to be accurate and compliant. I can't imagine why a financial institution would want to create that for themselves and why they wouldn't want to work with an expert third party.
One thing that has changed when it comes to identity, and it filters really into digital identity, is obviously the COVID pandemic. That's a huge impact, and governments around the world are looking at how they can incorporate a lot of people's health data in a sensitive but also protected way. So I'm interested to see where the COVID pandemic is going to change the concept of digital identity going forward.
Some of the things, I know that for example, a group called ID 2020 has done a huge amount of work around things like health passes. We haven't been directly involved in those things. But I think that the service that we provide complements that. So if you break down the way that identity works, it's really kind of interesting. It involves multiple steps. The first one is I have to recognize you. That's actually kind of challenging over a digital channel. But in person, I look at you and say, okay, I know what this person looks like. The next thing I do is I look at credentials that are associated with you. So in the digital space, that might be a verifiable credential in the new world, where I can see from a cryptographic signature that this is really, say, Doug's passport. What I have to do then, and this is the way it works with a passport, is that the passport includes the photograph. And then I have to assess, and you experience this when you go into the UK, for example, the machines read the photograph from the passport. That's what's in those RFID chips. Then the machine scans the face of the human being that's in front of it. And then the machine uses AI to compare the two and says, it's okay, this is the right person. This is what a human does anyway, right? What a human border guard would do. She would look at you, she would look at the passport. She'd say, okay, you look like the person in the passport, I'm going to let you in. And this looks like it's a real passport. The challenge with identity is that we don't want to repeat that with every site that we go to, where we may even abandon the shopping cart, because I don't want every single site to have my photograph or my biometrics or all the information in my government identity docs, nor do I want my government to have that. But I may want to work with an institution that I trust. And if I don't like it, I can move to a different institution that can verify this and perform this service. So the first is recognize who the person is. The second is look at their identity credentials and confirm that the person on this digital session is who they claim to be. And then the third thing is determine what they have access to. So maybe they have access to a bank account, or maybe they have access to come through a border, or maybe if the digital credential is a vaccine-related credential, they then can have access to a club because they're vaccinated, and that part of the world has issued these things. So that's how these all fit together. I'd say that by forcing us online, the pandemic has just raised the stakes in terms of more and more of our business is being done online, and we really have to get this thing solved. And we have to get it solved in a way where the consumer has control over their information. They only share the information they have to, rather than everything, which today too often we're forced to do.
Now, in what ways can financial organizations optimize their match rates?
If a financial institution is thinking about scaling up, adding thousands and thousands and thousands of customers, and doing so across geographies, that is why Trulioo has a role to play because identity is very complex. Let's start with this idea that scale matters. A lot of institutions will tackle this problem using analysts to do manual reviews. And they're using their best judgment and best practices, and they're trying to follow the regulations that are laid out by all of the pertinent laws and guidelines. That'll work on smaller scales. But if an institution like a cryptocurrency provider, a brokerage firm, is trying to add 100 countries and add millions of customers every single month, that breaks down. You cannot hire enough analysts to manually operate in that manner. And so you must do it using a big data and a data science-driven approach. So following regulatory guidelines, you set up a match logic. You say, well, I can have some tolerance on matching on the name because there are nicknames. Individuals might go by Douglas or Doug, Mike or Michael. And those tolerances, the regulators have said, we can do some level of what we call fuzzy matching. Mike and Michael is essentially the same name. And to reduce consumer confusion and frustration, you can create that tolerance, that it doesn't have to be an exact match. But there are other elements of your identity that regulators say that has to be an exact match, such as date of birth or a social security number. Some regulators say that must be an exact match, or physical address. So what we do is when we work with clients, we determine what it is that their logic dictates for matching. Some clients say one data source for verification is enough. Others say I need at least two for that to constitute an exact match. So for institutions that are looking to scale across many countries, they're not only dealing with the science of matching, they're also now having to look at cultural differences. I'll give you a quick example. In most of the Western world, when you look at addresses, you go from the most specific details to the least specific in how you write the address. You go the house number or apartment number, then the street name, then the city, then the postal code, then the country. In a lot of Asian countries, it's exactly the opposite. You write the address starting with the country, and you work your way all the way down to the most specific information. That is something that if you didn't know it, and you were trying to standardize the ingestion of addresses and do matching, it could be quite tricky. And then you take the fact that there's Arabic language characters, Cyrillic, non-Roman language characters, it becomes incredibly complex to do this globally.
One thing I've found out working on this episode is that digital identity is really enabling financial inclusion for a lot of people. So can you talk me through that a bit, please?
Yeah, that's one of the coolest parts. I'm really glad that you brought that up. How do we, financial inclusion, just to take a step back, there are so many people around the world, more than 1 billion adults who do not have a bank account. How do you get paid for your job if you don't have a bank account? How do you save money? How do you establish a credit history that you can use to then borrow so you can build up, whether it's buying a house or buying a car or doing anything? The data shows that if we can include more people in the financial system, we can radically improve their life. People talk about the reduction in poverty that's happened over the last 10 years in China. Arguably, a big part of that has been the adoption of Alipay as a mechanism for millions of people to be part of a financial system in a way that was much easier than before. The thing about working with institutions that can vouch for your identity is that, as one gentleman I spoke to through the IAF who represent a bank in Egypt, he said, we've gone through our local requirements to know who this person is, and they've banked with us for 20 years. Can I tell you their exact date of birth, or have I seen their birth certificate? No, but I can tell you that they're a customer in good standing with us for 20 years, and we can vouch for them. Which means, for example, if that bank in Egypt can say that this person who's got a widget factory is trustworthy and I can work with them, then I, in the States, can order widgets from them and know that they're going to deliver it. This levels the global playing field and allows people around the world to not have to give, say, 30% of their profit to some big online company that's currently distributing things for them, but instead allows them to go direct to their counterparties. I think this is the mechanism that we're hoping to set up.
To make that data available, or it's not just data that's even collected. And so, I worked in different circumstances where we try to move into different geographies, and that has always been a challenge, is being able to access data, not just for digital identity, but even to make solid lending decisions. If the data is not available, it makes it difficult. And so data is a key piece to how financial services is, at this point at least, provided to customers. And so that makes moving into different geographies somewhat difficult. Now for us, as I mentioned, we have relied on third parties to help us think through other sources of data. We've also realized that we can't always rely on traditional sources of data, like a credit score as an example. But there are other ways of thinking about data or thinking about customers that maybe not necessarily the traditional ways of thinking about customers, but it could be just as reliable. And so it requires some creativity, it requires some innovation, but ultimately we're going to bring financial inclusion, that we have to be able to think about customers differently, and quite frankly, even give customers a chance to prove themselves and collect data along the way, and then use that data to provide even better products in the future as well. And so, those banks who are mired in old business models, who really think about data in a very traditional way, are not going to be in a position to offer financial inclusion. We are. It's part of our mission. It's part of how we think about our business model, and it's a key part of how we think about data, because again, data is such a critical piece of our decision making.
Our mission is to identify the world. And we've been able to see about 5 billion individuals come through our system and be accurately identified. There's another 2 billion people. And you can think of all of the developing nations where they've never had a digital identity, which means they can't get access to public services. They can't access the financial system. They can't start a business. And so that has really driven our mission. So financial institutions that want to collaborate with us to get access to all the existing digital identified individuals and those that are about to enter into the system know that it requires a layered approach. So there are countries that don't have good address schemes. They just don't. Accurate address registration hasn't occurred. And so delivering products and services to those addresses is a challenge. So you have to work with things like geolocation, or in a marketplace environment, you use a network of individuals to corroborate, one particular member. There are many ways to do this. And so Trulioo's philosophy on being perfect is that it takes a layered approach. One solution is not going to solve everything. And that's why we explore things like biometrics, behavioral analytics, the use of digital signals such as geolocation and IP address information, in combination with the use of personal data to make sure we're as accurate as possible.
That's all we've got time for on today's episode of the Fintech Show, and I think it's been so insightful. What I've really learned from speaking with my guests here today is just how human an element of digital onboarding has to be. Even though it's tech-based, digital-based, the human element is right at the heart of it, and improving people's ability to access finance is really spearheading this drive to not only improve security, but also customer experience in finance. And I just want to say a massive thank you to our guests today, because some of their insight is so valuable in such a ever-changing, tech-based, innovative industry. It's very hard to keep track of where we are. And so I just want to say a massive thank you to our guests, Garient, Pepe, and Rod. But also a massive thank you to you, our viewers. You can of course catch the rest of the series and much more over at YouTube, ffnews.com, and of course LinkedIn, where you'll see me in the comments. So thank you once again, and goodbye.